Welcome. And thank you to all of you for attending online learning via the digital humanities, the online classroom, and the hybrid classroom, part of the AHA Colloquium series of virtual AHA. I'm Jeremy Young, the Communications and Marketing Manager here at the American Historical Association. We're excited to have all of you join us, and we are looking forward to a productive discussion. I would like to thank our generous sponsors, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Stanton Foundation, the History Channel, and Oxford University Press. Just a quick comment about the circumstances under which we're having this meeting. We know that things are challenging for a lot of Americans right now, and we just want to note that here at the AHA, we believe both that we need to continue carrying on with business as usual when possible, and perhaps more importantly, that panels such as this one that focus on the teaching and learning of history are more important than ever before. So it's under those conditions that we're holding this event today. You can support virtual AHA and other AHA activities by joining the AHA, or if you are already a member, making a donation today. We will post links with details in the chat. A few logistical things to cover before we jump into the webinar. By registering for or participating in the AHA's webinars, participants and panelists agree to abide by the AHA's Code of Professional Conduct. All participants are muted. Please use the Q&A function to submit questions to the presenters. We hope to address all relevant questions, but also want to be mindful of time. We may paraphrase or combine questions. If you would like to be part of the conversation on social media, please remember to use the virtual AHA hashtag. Finally, a quick reminder that this webinar is being recorded and we will share the recording on YouTube soon. It is now my great pleasure to introduce today's panel chair, Christina Ghanbarpour of Saddleback College.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm going to start sharing my screen so that you can see a sort of live transcript of what we're going to be talking about today. Before I begin, I wanted to address the unprecedented events of last night and early this morning. I hope all of our attendees from or with family in the DC area are safe and well, and I thank you all for attending. We have 4 speakers today, including myself, and as we have a fairly limited time for each of our discussants, I'd like to get started right away. First, a few introductions. My name is Christina Ghanbarpour, and I am chairing this panel. I am co-chair of the History Department at Saddleback College in Mission Viejo, California. I teach East Asian and world history. My field is pre-war and early post-war Japan. I received my doctorate in history from the University of California at Irvine, and I have a master's in the social sciences from the University of Chicago. I'm originally from New York, New York. Brandon Morgan will be our first speaker after me. So I guess our second speaker. He is the chair of the history department at Central New Mexico Community College in Albuquerque, and he also teaches upper division and graduate courses on Mexican and borderlands history for Western New Mexico University. He began his first college classes as a community college student at the College of Eastern Utah, and he earned a PhD in modern Mexican and US-Mexico borderlands history at the University of New Mexico. Our third panelist is Scott M. Williams, who has a BA in history from Rice University and an MA in history from Penn State University. He has been teaching at Weatherford College, a community college just west of Fort Worth, Texas, since 2006. At Weatherford College, he teaches the U.S. History Surveys, both in hybrid and online formats. He is also the Assistant Department Chair in charge of assessment for the Social Sciences Department. As well, he chairs the e-learning advisory committee and is a co-creator of the Weatherford College Learning Community and the Universal Design for Learning Task Force. Our last panelist is Lisa Marie Rood. Dr. Rood is a professor of history at Normandale Community College in Bloomington, Minnesota. Dr. Rood received her doctoral degree in history and women's studies at the University of Maine. She earned her Master of Arts in Women's History from Sarah Lawrence College. Her primary research concentration is on 20th century women's political history, focused on the impact of the women's movements on the First Ladies of the United States. We will begin with Dr. Morgan's presentation on teaching to less prepared students. Then I will discuss accessibility in online education. We will follow with Scott M. Williams's presentation on teaching hybrid introductory history classes, and Dr. Wood's preview of the teaching websites Beyond the Bubble and DocSeech. We will conclude with a brief summary and a Q&A. Please hold your questions for the Q&A session at the end. Go ahead, Brandon.
Brandon, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christina. It looks like I need you to stop sharing your screen before I can share mine. Thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's see, I think that did, hold on one second, I apologize. I promise I tried this a second ago and it worked. All right, let's see. I see the problem. I have just fixed it. Okay, there we go. So you'll notice that the title here looks a little different than what was just advertised. This idea, this presentation has taken many different shapes since I first proposed it over a year ago now. Well, I guess maybe just a little less than a year ago now. There have been so many things that have happened in the intervening year. And so I will be focusing a lot on less prepared students, but in the context of the global pandemic and as well of the circumstances and events yesterday at the Capitol building in Washington, it's taken on a shape that looks a little bit more like the blog post that I shared back in March on perspectives for the AHA. So I just wanted to point out, and I'll hit present here so that this will go full screen, that you can access these slides using this bit.ly link. So it's just bit.ly/Morgan-AHA21. I have embedded links. A lot of the images that you'll see here do link to other resources. So please, take advantage of accessing the slides and accessing those other resources. So I want to start here. My thinking over the last several months has shifted more and more strongly toward work that I've been doing at my community college around critical digital pedagogy. So I've been involved with the Digital Pedagogy Lab, if you know of that, and those folks' work, participating in attending there and sharing there, and also bringing the ideas of critical digital pedagogy back to the teaching that we're doing specifically in the humanities at CNM in Albuquerque. I've just started as a member of the editing board at Hybrid Pedagogy. It's the collaborative peer-reviewed journal of the Critical Pedagogy Lab. And if you click that image there, it'll take you to an essay that was posted there by historian Kate Denial that has really impacted and influenced my teaching. It's called A Pedagogy of Kindness. And so something that I've been thinking about a lot when trying to approach this question of how do we teach history to students who are, I think the term that I was putting around was less prepared, and I put it in quotation marks here. Usually that just means diversely prepared. In my classrooms, I'll encounter students who already have even advanced degrees that are coming back to community college in retirement. I'll have students who are fresh out of high school. I'll have students who are still in high school. I'll have some who have been previously incarcerated who are trying to get back into their lives through taking community college courses. I have a whole wide range of ethnic and cultural diversity as well. And something that has been an experience for me over the past 10 years is I've been teaching online. I was teaching online before the pandemic hit last year, is that our model for teaching online is asynchronous, meaning that I can't actually require students to be on at a certain time. We don't have Zoom sessions. And so all the work that we do comes through what I share with them via the LMS. And I started using a lot of digital tools, including Twitter and a few things I'll talk about, because I wanted to feel like I was teaching a class rather than having a correspondence course. which can be something that happens in an asynchronous setting. And so when I think about pedagogy, then I think about, how can I create authentic learning experiences for my students in this kind of a setting? How can I recognize the things that students bring with them that will enrich our study of the past? And I say our study because I try to create a community of learners and help students to connect with each other, even though we're teaching through screens. We have to remember that there are human beings, people on the other end at all times. And that, again, can be, it maybe seems obvious or too straightforward, but when you're working asynchronously, it can be too easy to kind of teach to the screen or think about just what's in front of you rather than what's beyond that screen and what people are experiencing. So one of the ideas that has really influenced me as well is this quote from Paulo Freire about studying is not the consumption of ideas, but the creation and recreation of them. And so I think about when I'm designing courses and activities, how can I help students understand that? And in particular, how can I help them see that with the discipline of history? How can I help them understand history as a dynamic and robust field, not just something that has a bunch of dates and names to remember? Another thing that I've been thinking about as well is this idea of gatekeeping. Particularly with the range of students with the backgrounds that I've been talking about, or that I just kind of briefly mentioned. I'm really trying to think about are the things that I'm doing to shape the course, are those things about gatekeeping, or are they about bringing people into the fold? Are they about helping people understand the kinds of thinking, the kinds of skills that we apply analytically and otherwise as historians that they can then apply and use in their own lives? Or is it just about, well, I had to check some boxes, so they do too at this point? I wanted to put this in here because it's something I always emphasize, and I think hopefully it's less important now than it was maybe a few years ago, but there can be this sort of tendency to just want to use a bunch of digital tools because it's cool, and it's the new thing, and that seems like great pedagogy, but we always have to remember that the tool itself isn't important. It's what is the purpose of the tool? What pedagogical goals do we have? What are our values, and how are we putting those things to use? I added this slide yesterday afternoon, as so many of us were watching the raid on the Capitol building. And this is something that has become really important for me as well. And I think it also speaks to teaching to students of all backgrounds and all abilities. They need to understand that I trust them as their instructor, and also that there's room in course design for compassion, that I know that there are human beings on the other side of those screens, that they're experiencing traumas and difficulties. I know that I did in certain ways yesterday, and I kind of froze and wasn't doing much work at all. I imagined they were as well. So I posted a quick video to kind of help them understand what I was grappling with. I offered them some space in our LMS and Brightspace where they could start a conversation. Some people, as you can see in the screenshot on the left, responded on Twitter, our classes on Twitter. And I think that, some of this is just about flexibility. Oh, I guess I should mention, I'm currently teaching a intersession New Mexico history course. So it's a 2-week class. It's intensive, as you can imagine. It's asynchronous, but because we're doing so much in so little time together, there's often a lot of overlap. So we end up doing things in asynchronous platforms almost in a synchronous way, if that makes sense, because we're all working on it at the same time. And so beyond just kind of being flexible and, recognizing human needs and being compassionate as a pedagogy and as the basis for the best learning and creating community, those 2 images down here, whoops, I thought I could get a pointer, down here at the bottom, I clipped from the syllabus. So a couple of years ago, based on some learning I did at the Digital Pedagogy Lab, I started adding my teaching philosophy to the syllabus. So it's just a quick paragraph blurb, but to kind of set the tone for what we'll be doing in the course and what students can expect from me as an instructor, and my recognition that they bring a lot to the table, that they also, are responsible adults that have families, they have jobs, they're trying to do several things at once. Again, I recognize that. I also added a section on teaching and learning during a pandemic that I found online from Sarah Goldrick-Rab. And, this is also recognizing that there are so many of us who, unlike me, who's been online for years, didn't want to be online, but have to be now. And so, again, just trying to set that tone of, I trust you as students and what you can bring. And so we can create this community where learning can happen. If you click here, it will take you to my Intro to Historical Study course on Medium. For the next few minutes, as I end out, then I want to talk about some of the tools that I do use to facilitate community and historical thinking skills in these kinds of asynchronous survey classes. So at CNM, I teach mostly New Mexico history and the survey of modern Latin American history. I also teach US history here and there as well, but these are all survey courses. Something that we did as a department, in a redesign last year, as we had some funding from Mellon and cooperation with the university across the street to promote transfer pathways and programs in the humanities. We were thinking about, well, what can we do to help students kind of see history as this dynamic field that has a specific way of thinking. So I took a lot of cues from what Jim Grossman has said over time and again about historical thinking and its value. We've focused a lot on what are historical thinking skills and how students can approach the study of the past from a critical angle. So this course, if you click here, I put it up on Medium, which is an online blogging platform. I created the course as a publication. I won't get into technical things about the platforms that I'm using. If anybody has questions about that, you can contact me via Twitter, or I'll share my contact information as well. And I can talk more about that. But the benefit of Medium for that particular course was that it allowed us to kind of all blog together. So we're all writing longer form pieces that everyone can easily share and read each other's work. In other courses, as I've alluded to, we use Twitter for kind of the initial conversation about readings. So I'm pushing students to identify and discuss the most significant elements of the readings that we're working on. As you can see from the conversation there, I sometimes will chime in and push them a little bit further. I didn't actually on this one, but I would chime in and kind of push our discussions a bit more deeply. But it's a way also, and this is something I work on with students, is to show them there are different genres, different approaches, and different contexts for writing that we do and thinking that we do about history. So this is a public platform, but it's one where you have to be concise. And so what we're working on here is concisely identifying key elements and talking about them in meaningful but brief ways. This Tiki-Taki timeline, that's a mouthful, that's the platform that I use to create a collaborative digital timeline with my students. This is a screenshot from the one that's going on right now. They identify, building on what they've done on Twitter and those conversations they've had, they identify key historical figures, places, events, or themes, and they put entries up on those, and then they end up connecting those to each other. So if you click on that, you can go and see in depth the kind of work that they're doing. They have to write about it. I push them to think about historical significance and actually adding their interpretation of the events. So trying to build the conversation, build our knowledge based on doing a little bit of additional research into the topic they've chosen, and then placing it in the context of what we're learning in class. This is something, though, that I recognize as I've been doing these Twitter and timeline things with students for a couple of years now, is that as many people have written about that do the scholarship on teaching and learning in history, analytical reading is something that people come with widely divergent abilities and skills in that. And as instructors, I think we have a widely divergent ability to address sometimes the unique ways that we should read historical texts. So recognizing that at the beginning of all of my courses, I need to talk about what is it you're going to do when I ask you to read something for our course. In the Intro to Historical Thinking class, we spend quite a bit of time on that, more than I do in the survey courses that are more content-based. But in Intro to Historical Study, we use this platform called Hypothesis that you may have seen and heard about. It's a digital annotation tool, so it's like the ability to annotate in the margins of any website. You can also do this with PDFs. So I was able to share this example comes from Patrick Real's great resources online about reading and writing for history. And so I assigned them this section called predatory reading, where they're thinking about how do you approach a secondary source analytically. And they jump in. I've given them some specific parameters for things they need to identify in this reading, and then they do that in the margins. They're able to talk to each other. I'm able to, again, be part of that conversation, as well as follow-up questions, so that we're kind of practicing close reading. We're practicing skills of reading for history, while as we actually do that thing, and talking about what we're getting from this, how it's working, how different people take different things out of the same reading, and so on. And then we apply this over the course of the semester. So this has been something that has helped to address that sort of missing skill that for too long I'd kind of been missing, and I think helps better connect to the students as I ask them to read and write concisely on Twitter. Now we have some terms and ideas and concepts that we can use so that they understand what it is that they should be doing, and we can work on that and grow from there. All right, it looks like I have 2 minutes left, but I'm going to cut it short and give everyone else just a little bit more time. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hearing from my fellow panelists.
Great. Thanks so much, Brandon. That was wonderful. And there's so many interesting key terms in there. Well, okay, so for my part of the session, I'm going to screen share. And let's get this working. Share, and then let's see. Here we go. All right, here we go. So my piece of this session is accessibility in online education, and my focus today will be on accessibility basics for faculty who are just starting the process of making their classes more accessible, perhaps as a result of shifting to an online format. I will be discussing simple changes that will have the biggest impact on accessibility, particularly for students with visual impairments, such as tricks and tools in MS Office software, such as Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, PDFs, and resources for the learning management system, or LMS, called Canvas. Now, if you do not use the software I've just mentioned, never fear. Many of the tools I will be providing you with today also apply broadly to on-campus teaching and to software outside of those I mentioned above, including Google Docs, websites, and other LMSs. I will also cover some of the ways that we as faculty can employ the concept of accessibility flexibly as a mindset for making our classes more user-friendly for all of our students, regardless of ability, experience, or income. So the first question I want to pose to you today is why? Why take the time to develop a more accessible classroom? Shouldn't you be focusing exclusively on content, the production of history? To paraphrase the words of one San Francisco, sorry, that was my timer. To paraphrase the words of one San Francisco-based law firm, federal law imposes upon employers certain requirements to avoid discrimination against disabled employees. That same act, that is the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, also applies to provision of educational services, both in terms of doing what is right and in terms of obeying the law. It is vital for institutions as well as individuals to make sure that they are in compliance with ADA requirements. One mistake we perhaps make as faculty is to assume that disabilities are not very common. On the contrary, it is estimated that 1 in 3 Americans have some form of astigmatism, which can affect the ability to perceive color. Additionally, 4.2 million Americans over the age of 40 have some form of visual impairment, and disabilities as a whole are region specific. So they're more common in some parts of the US than others. Disabilities are most common in the South. Another thing to keep in mind is that color blindness is also more common among men than women, affecting approximately 8% of men versus less than 1% of women. So if you think about teaching a big intro class of 200 students, or maybe you're teaching approximately 200 students per semester, you can see that the numbers start to add up. So there's a need to address disabilities such as visual impairment in the history classroom. But you may ask yourself, how is this my problem, right? Shouldn't someone else in the university or college where I work be responsible for accessible content? I don't have one answer to that question. I have at least two. So the first answer is, it is not an undue burden on faculty to say, stop underlining text in your documents. You don't need a specialist to come in and do this for you. All you have to do really is just take a look at your syllabi and your exams. Is there a lot of underlining? And then just take it out. I want to start with an earlier document that I created for use in my class. You can see there's underlining all over the place, right? Now, what you can do to help this, right, help this problem is, let me see if I can go to, oh, I see, this is blocking it. All right, here we go. Sorry about that. You can go to check accessibility, and you might get this message. This document is in an older format with limited functionality. Consider converting this file. So if you do get that message, it still works, but you have to do something to make it work. You go to File, Save As, and then you save it as not this, but as this, right? And then you can start using Accessibility Checker. Let me go to my more recent version of this. So that's here. Okay, so now I'm ready to use Accessibility Checker, right? Because I've updated it. And it says, no accessibility issues found. What's going on, right? Accessibility checkers are great tools, and I'm going to show you some of the ways that they can help us, but they cannot get everything. This is where faculty have to come in with their knowledge and expertise and look at a document like this and say, this is not really that great. So what's wrong with it? Well, if you're visually impaired, you might look at this document and maybe you don't perceive the color. So from experience, you look at this document and you say, okay, well, I know that when something is underlined, that means that it's a hyperlink. But now look at this whole document. There are clearly some hyperlinks, right? And then there are other things that are not, right? So as the student, you may choose to go through this whole document and try every time you see a link to kind of click on it and see if it works. Or you may just opt out and say, you know what, I just don't know what's a link, so I'm not going to click on anything. And so then they lose that educational content, right? There's something else that's wrong with this document, which is that some of these things are links that don't have underlining, right? So you need to use underlining strategically. Use it for hyperlinks to signal that there is a hyperlink there, but take it out everywhere else. You want to limit your underlining to hyperlinks, and that's it. Now, there's a third point here that I'm going to talk about a little bit later, but since it's right on the page, I want to get to it right now. When you have a long website, so a long web address, consider using a link instead of that. And the reason I say this, I'm going to show you how to do it. So I'm going to write here, link. You click on this, you do insert, hyperlink. Uh-oh, I think I did the whole thing. So I just want to do one word, right? So insert hyperlink, and then I put it in here. And then I go here. Okay. So now it's linked, it's in color, and it's also underlined, right? The reason you want to put web addresses as a link instead of writing it all out is because screen readers will read every single painful letter and character in these, huge long websites that we sometimes use. And it becomes really frustrating for the student to get through a document like that. So if you can, use hyperlinks instead, and also avoid the whole, click here to access this website. Instead, use a specific word. This is another one of those things that screen readers won't pick up. If you put click here instead of using a link, your screen reader will not pick up on that. So again, limit underlining, use underlining just for websites, links, that kind of thing. And as much as possible, try to replace web addresses with links that have a specific word, right? Not click here or something like that. Okay, so getting out of that crazy document for a moment, I want to get to my second answer to this question of how is this my problem? And my other answer to that is it shouldn't just be your problem. To really make this work, you need integration between faculty and institutions. So this is where I make my appeal via history faculty to institutions, administrators, wherever you may be. Please do hire more disability specialists, offer training, get software. Some of the software we're going to be looking at together, such as Wave Reader, can be installed for free on your laptop. So no problem there. But others of them, such as Ally, need institutional approval to be installed. So if you need help convincing anyone, I will be happy to provide you with a whole list of lawsuits against universities and colleges that haven't done that work of trying to provide accessible content to students. Now I want to get to the how part. So we've looked at what faculty can do to get accessibility, the why of it. Now I want to talk about what faculty can do to get accessibility off the ground. We've discussed underlining. What else can you do? For Microsoft Office and Google Docs, automate as much as possible. If you automate it, it can communicate things that screen readers don't understand, like the organization of a document. So for example, automation can just be something as simple as this. So, you're making a list, you see it auto formats, right? But if I don't want it to auto format for whatever reason, and just do this, it's actually harder for students who are using screen readers to understand what the ordination is here and what the order is if you number it this way than if you just go like this and automate it, right? So you want to make sure that you're doing that with both numbering and also with bullet points. Another thing that you might do, and you may think by this point that I'm obsessed with lines or something like that, but if you're going to include lines as kind of a decorative feature in your documents, be careful how you do it. The way I used to do it was I used to do something like this: turn on underline and then tab, 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 and great, I have a line. That is problematic, again, because screen readers can't read that. So try to avoid doing that, right? And we've also talked about problems with underlining. The other thing is you might do something like this: insert shape and then insert the line, right? Okay, but then you're going to run into another problem. And I've put it up here. You do your tools accessibility checker, and what's going to come up is this: error, missing alternative text, straight connector 1. That means that the computer, and thus the screen reader, is reading this as a picture, and it doesn't know what to do with it. It doesn't have enough information to communicate to the student what this is. So what you put in as kind of a simple, like, oh, pretty design element, winds up being something that's fairly confusing to students who can't understand it. Now, what you can't do is, let me see, you do this. Sorry, let me bring it up again. Go there. Oh, for some reason, it's not coming up right now. Okay, here we go. And then you do this, and then you do edit all text. This is where you could put in information on that picture, right? So let me just bring it up. You can write a sentence that just says descriptor, or you can mark it as decorative. I suggest to you to avoid that whole problem and just do this instead. You see this? You go here, you click on borders, you do a bottom border, and then click. Hold on. Let's bring it back in. Ta-da! And it's done. Again, automating helps communicate the correct information to students without frustrating or confusing them when they're using a screen reader. So those are just some simple things to keep in mind. Some things I want to also talk about. So PowerPoint, right? And also Word. When you're creating a document such as the one you have in front of you right now, try to use headers. These are automated, but you have to like click on it to make it work. So here, for example, right, this is my title. A person who is sighted would identify it as the title because it's big and in bold. But again, you want to communicate to the screen reader that this is the title, right? So that students with visual impairment can perceive that. So you just do this, right? Sometimes you get like blue or bold or something, and you say, oh, I hate that. I don't want my title to look like that. It's a very simple fix. What you do is highlight the whole text the way I have it now, right? And then you click on it. For me, I'm using a Mac command. Oops, here we go. Open this up first. See that? Command click. Oops, sorry. Let's try that again. All right, let's see if it works for me now. No, it's still not doing it. I know these things can be fickle. Let's try another one. Maybe this, I'll have better luck with this one. Come on. There we go. Okay. Control click, and then you click update heading to match selection. That sets the heading to whatever you want it to look like so that you don't have to worry about having some sort of crazy blue capitalized font. You select what you want it to look like. Again, you do this, highlight the whole text. Set your text the way you want it to look, highlight it. On a Mac, control click, make sure heading is highlighted, oops, which I didn't do, and then update heading 1 to match selection, right? Now, you'll also notice on the left hand of my screen, you can see this nice outline of my document. If you're using Word docs or even Google Docs to do your presentations, you can use this to help your students keep track of the content of the document. So this is not just for students with visual impairment. This is for any student who needs help organizing information, which might be a lot of our students. To get this thing, go to View, and then see this navigation pane, that turns it on and off. And then that's the document, right? Go here to get that nice list of your document, whatever it might be. Now you can see here how headers work. So everything here, these are all header ones, right? So agenda, introduction, me, right? These are header twos. So headers fold into each other. 2 goes into 1, 3 goes into 2, etc. So you have to kind of keep that in mind as you're organizing it. What does this look like on PowerPoint? So you have to do the same thing. You go to View, but then you go to Outline View, and then you get this nice list. And then you can see whether your slides have titles. This is again important for screen readers, how they're organized. If you have any extraneous spaces, you can just sort of go there and delete them. Again, you want to keep it sort of reasonable for students to understand what's going on in the document. So you can use that outline to help you navigate a document and help your students navigate documents both in Word and in PowerPoint. If you're using Excel a lot, one key point here is be careful of merged cells. So I did check accessibility, right? Again, over here, warning, merged cell, right? Screen readers cannot read these. So what you do is you go click on your merged cell and then just unmerged cell. And now it's accessible, right? So it's really intuitive and really simple to do. It's just that most of us never receive training on how to do this. And so we create these documents and then, our IT staff goes back and looks at it and says, oh, this is not accessible at all. Okay, so I am running out of time. Let me get to a few more points and then send you on your way. Can you check accessibility in LMSs? Yes, and I want to introduce you to a great way to do this, which is, so here. So this is my web page in Canvas. you can get something called Wave Reader. And this is something that is available for free online as a download. It is this, so it's an extension, right? You click on it and it looks at your web page and it tells you if there are any problems. Now, some of them you won't be able to fix. Like, for example, this contrast error, I can't fix it because I don't make that program. But there are things I can fix. You can see over here, I have an extraneous header. Over here, I have another extraneous header. Over here, it tells you, you click on it, and it tells you linked image missing alternative text. How do I fix it, right? Well, turn off your Wave Reader, right? So get out of that. Then if you're in, oops, yes. So then if you're in Canvas, just very quickly, you can go into it and you can modify it. You can go here, something like this, and click on it, image options, right? And then put in alt text, right? Also, those of you who are using Canvas, there is an accessibility checker, but it's fairly limited. You notice it only catches 2 issues, whereas the other one caught many more. If you want to use automated accessibility tools correctly, try to combine them so that way you get, you know, what one misses, maybe the other one will get. And of course, you now as a faculty member with this knowledge can hopefully go and now keep that knowledge alive and make documents with those particular features. Okay, I'm out of time, but very quickly, I wanted to mention to you guys other ways to increase accessibility. Start with introductory lessons, use open source documents, be aware that your students may be accessing your online courses on cell phones. The US Office of Policy and Development, for example, found more low-income households have access to a smartphone than a computer, and also that's their main way of accessing the internet. And if you want more information about this, you can check my blog post for the AHA. Before you do anything, start here. And of course, you can also email me and also get to know your disability specialist. Okay, go ahead. We are now switching to Scott. So I'm going to mute myself.
Okay. And if you can stop screen sharing, I will then share my screen. Okay. Oops. Share screen, and let me find my desktop and share. And let me now switch over to PowerPoint. Always love it when the Zoom controls cover what you actually want to do. So give me just a second here to put this on present. Okay. Can you see just my slides there? Or is it showing all the Zoom stuff as well? Just the slides? Okay. Always the thing, like what all is going to show up here for you to actually see. Okay, well, I'm going to talk a little bit today about hybridizing introductory history classes using what I call the case studies in American history model. I am a professor at Weatherford College. I've been here since 2006, and I have been teaching hybrid since about 2014, although the roots of my hybrid teaching go back to about 2010 to 2012, because I started doing things that I didn't even know was hybridizing in what I was doing in my classes before I even really learned what that actually meant. And so I want to talk a little bit about how I came to this model of hybridization, and then I'm going to show you some examples of how I actually do it in my classes. So what does it take to hybridize your classes? That's often one of the things that gets asked, especially in the last year, since so many of us have been asked to go hybrid, required to go hybrid in our courses. For one, it takes a willingness to experiment with new models. This is not as true as it once may have been, as I said, because many of us have been forced to move to hybrid models, but it still does take a willingness to experiment. It takes a willingness to give up some control over the presentation of our content, and it takes a willingness to let the course be more student focused than being professor focused. So these are 3 things that you kind of have to have in your mind as what your class is going to look like if you start hybridizing it. Now, my approach to hybridization came from several dissatisfactions that I had with traditional lecture teaching. For one, I was dissatisfied with the fact that even during my most engaging lectures, and actually I got very good course reviews out of my lecture classes, I still had many students who would phase out or not keep their attention on what I was lecturing. I was dissatisfied with student preparation and knowledge when asking them questions inside my lectures, with the feeling that they seemed to have done no preparation ahead of time, hadn't read the stuff ahead of time, and were largely just passively taking in my lectures. I was dissatisfied with being the voice of truth at the front of the class, because in many ways, that this is my feeling about it. I'm not trying to degrade anybody who actually does lecturing, but in my feeling, when I'm up there lecturing, the students often look at something that I say as this is the one truth, or this is the one thing that is correct, whereas I much more like a dialogue model of bringing in multiple perspectives. And I was also dissatisfied with the traditional model of memorization, regurgitation of material, because I found that over time, what I was doing, and this is just kind of how I naturally fell into it as a lecturer, is that in many ways, what I would end up doing was I would lecture on something. I would expect my students to take notes on that lecture. I would have a quiz or exam on that material from that lecture. And the thing that was most correct would be, if they can give me back my lecture in as close to my words as possible, became what was correct. And I just started saying, well, are they learning, or are they just memorizing for the purpose of this assignment and then flushing it out of their memory afterwards? So these are my dissatisfactions that I had, and that led me to how to hybridize. And I said I came through this as a process over a course of a couple of years. The first step is deciding what you're going to cover, because you necessarily have to not be able to talk about everything in your class if you hybridize your class. You are going to be meeting the students less. A traditional hybrid class is about once a week, although models can go as few as 4 or 5 times a semester, and up to maybe 2/3 of the semester meetings that you meet. I mean, it can go anywhere in there. You have to say, my students are going to get the content outside of class, and you have to hold them responsible for getting that material outside of class. And then you have to decide what is the most important thing for them to do when you are actually in the meeting with them. This forces you to move away from the coverage model, as in you lecturing the coverage model. Not that the students don't get a narrative of history, they're just going to get it outside of you talking to them, and you are going to have to do something different with them in the actual session itself. And this is one thing I often see with people who hybridize without really having thought a whole lot about it, especially for a lot of people who were forced to hybridize recently, which is they say, well, then I'm just going to squeeze what would be 2 days of lecture into 1 day of lecture and just do it really, really fast and try and get it all done. I mean, you have to let go of some control, but the advantage is you get to shape the course more to the things that you want to concentrate in on. You can bring in your own focus and say, this is something you should know. You're going to do it outside of class. We're going to spend the time here in class on it. And so that leads me to what I call the case studies model of teaching history. And I'm going to show you what this ends up looking like for me. And I, like Christina, I use Canvas. So this is inside my Canvas classroom. And this is one that I actually just got finished teaching in the fall. This is my second half of American history course. And this is what the students would see. This happens to be week 5, and I've chosen week 5 of the course simply because this is actually the first assignment I ever hybridized. You know, I talked about it being a process as I was going through. This I hybridized before I even knew I was doing something called hybridizing a class. And so I started moving things online for the students, such as my lecture material. In this case, my students have my lecture material in the form of my lecture notes. So the notes that I would have lectured from in a online format. They have them in the form of the PowerPoint that I would have shown in class if I was lecturing in class. and they have audio podcasts of me delivering these lectures. I went over to our music department. They have these nice padded rooms, feel like you're going to an insane asylum, but they have these nice padded rooms that you can go, you can close the door, they're soundproof, you can turn off the AC or the heat. And I just sat there over a summer and I recorded myself, doing these lectures, and it's straight up audio recording here. Now, my next task at this point in time is eventually I'm going to turn these into video lectures, but I'm not there yet. That takes some time. Then in week 5, they're going to read a chapter of the textbook. And I use Crash Course US History videos. I find them to be very good. And it fits for me that idea again, that I'm not the one voice of truth for the students. So they are getting my lectures, they're getting the textbook, and they're getting Crash Course US History. They're getting 3 different ways they're being taught this exact same period of history, so that they have 3 different perspectives that they can look at as they're approaching the material. I do have some assignments like I use McGraw-Hill and I use the SmartBook product, which helps them read the textbook and holds them responsible for reading the textbook. That's the presenting the material side of things. So then what do we do in class? Well, I organize it in something I call the week 5 activity. So each week has its own activity. And what it looks like in Canvas is this. I tell them, and any of you who are in the AHA will recognize these. I use the AHA's skills of what we're going to be talking about. I take out the ones that are relevant for that particular week. So this list is different every single week of what skills we're going to be working on. I give them an overview of the assignment. In this case, week 5 is the progressive era. The only thing we're going to talk about in class is the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. And I'm going to use the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire to talk about the rise of progressivism, but also to talk about race, class, immigration, income inequality, working class issues. All of these things can come into this one idea. I give them an overview of it, some background information as to, hey, concentrate in on some particular section to read from my lecture and from the textbook as you're going into it. And then in this case, they then watch a documentary. I'm not doing anything, hugely revolutionary here. I mean, yes, watch a documentary, but they watch this documentary outside of class so that they can be prepared to come in and talk about it in class. And I have some things for them to think about as they are watching it. Then they have to write ahead of time a 250-word response to a question. In this case, the question is this. I do this so that I hold them responsible for actually doing the assignment, watching the documentary, reading the documents. Sometimes they play a game in history about something, or as the next one I'm going to show you, I have them actually reading primary sources and acting as a person in history. So whatever it may be, this 250 words gets them prepared for that. And as I tell them, bring it to class. Bring that to class, bring it to class and have it with you, because this is going to be the type of things we're going to talk about. I actually ran an experiment very early on in my hybrid classes where I was teaching both a first half and a second half of American history course. One of them, I did these weekly writing assignments before class. One of them I did not. The participation grades were almost a full letter grade higher in the one where they had to write something ahead of time, because it held them responsible for doing whatever it was. And then I tell them, this is what we're going to be talking about in the in-class discussion. And then when they come to class, that's what we're going to do. My class time is spent in a discussion where the students are fully prepared to talk about that material. So the students have my background material, the lectures, the textbook, the crash course videos. They have done whatever it is, the watching the documentary, reading documents, whatever, and they have already started to write about it ahead of time, and then we can come in and we can talk about it. And then it's my responsibility with the students to negotiate that discussion over the course of that week's meeting to meet the objectives that I want them to hit. So it is a guided discussion, although I have had some that I've let it go completely. My favorite discussion I had one time about 3 years ago where I asked one question: what did you think? Hour and 15 minutes later, I had not asked another question. It was just gone straight in, because the students, if they're coming in prepared, and like Brandon was talking about, if these are less prepared students, I mean, I'm trying to walk them through, how do you prepare for a class, rather than the just show up and have ideally a blank piece of paper and a pencil and hopefully get something out of it. I'm trying to guide them into, how do you prepare for a class and be ready to go. Another example, and this is actually from last spring. It's week 9 of my American history, the second half of American history course. And I say it's from last spring because it includes group work, which has become much more difficult to do with the pandemic. So this was actually, week 9 was the week before spring break. So right before everything shut down last spring. In this case, it's the start of the Cold War. So same material, lecture, textbook, crash course US history. But in this case, the activity is having the students go in and look at the Venona Project. And if you've never heard of the Venona Project before, the Venona Project is the project where we, as the United States, were able to intercept and decrypt Soviet transmissions to their spies, essentially, in the United States. And so I'm introducing the students to this because I find none of them know about this at all, and have them go through and work on what it means to know this material. And I'm going to say, I know Lisa is going to present later on Beyond the Bubble, which is something I have used. I have cribbed this totally from somewhere else on the web, because there's no reason for us to recreate things. I mean, to look at these. I went to a site called EdCitement from the National Endowment for the Humanities, which Jeremy said is a sponsor of, of the American Historical Association. And I pulled this straight from. I go and look at, grades 9 through 12, and then I just basically build it up to something that I find is suitable for a college level approach. The good thing is they have a lot of things ready to go for you. Like, I didn't have to go and find these materials. They had them ready. They had the links ready. I could pull them in and do what I wanted to with them. In this case, I put it into, again, I use McGraw-Hill, use a program called Power of Process. And to prepare the students ahead of time, I have them read a document that is a declassified document, that was a document essentially given to new recruits into the FBI to acquaint them with what the Venona Project is. So that's what they read ahead of time. So they are coming in as if they are an investigator in the FBI who's looking into this, what we have as far as Soviet spies in the United States. And so they get asked a series of questions about them. That's what they do ahead of time. And then in class, I divide them up into groups, and they have to go and find, as again, a recruit into the FBI, they have to go and find information on one of these people and then answer these questions about those people as a group in class. And what I tell them is, we're going to start with the primary sources, which is this. This is all in the FBI. This is the actual, declassified documents from the FBI. And yeah, they're ugly. And I tell them, this is what it means to do real history. You're going to look at ugly things. But each of these people that they look up, there's actually headings in here. And Christina was talking about headings, and you don't get the nice headings you can search easily. But, there are the headings in here, and they go look for, oh, look, here's Judith Coplin. Look, there's Judith Coplin. So they go and they find that person. They can start answering the questions. And then I ask them, now go and Google the person. What do we now know? So now I'm taking you out of being the FBI person at that point in time to a person in the modern day. What do we know as far as anything that's come up since then? Because of course the FBI records are going to stop at a certain point. So I want to know, did they serve time? How long did they serve? What did they do after they got out of jail? Did they go to jail? How did they live the rest of their lives? They find out some of these people committed suicide and never even made it to trial. One of them, and I can't remember which one off the top of my head, but one of them died like 5 years ago. So, I mean, you've got all of these different places that you can go with it. And again, what is this doing? It's having the students think historically, back to what Brandon was talking about, you having them think historically, but also teaching them what it means to be a historian, how do we come up with the things that we come up with, having them look at a primary source, having them act as a person, which gets them to think, what would a person at that point in time think? And then having them produce something afterwards. In this case, I have them, if there's time in class, I have them do the groups present what they found to the rest of the group. So they start to see that, hey, I picked those 5 people because this person told on this person, who told on this person, who told on this person, who eventually got the Rosenbergs killed. That's the link that all of these, the link that all of these come through. So that's, I guess I'm out of time now. So I'm going to say, that is the idea of what I use with case studies in American history. And I'm going to turn it over to Lisa now, who actually is going to talk, I know, about some of these other places you could pull some of these things from. So let me stop my screen sharing and turn it over.
It helps when you unmute to be able to talk to people. I am going to put a couple of links in the chat. I will reference those as they come up. They're not small links, I apologize, but they are direct clickable, and even in the presentation mode, you should be able to click those links. So I'll do what my colleagues did, and I will start sharing my screen. My presentation today is to give you some resources to go forward and use primary sources in your classroom, whether it be synchronous, asynchronous, face-to-face, hybrid, whatever model you're using, whatever model your campus is using. To that end, we're going to be looking at 2 resource websites, the Stanford History Education Group's Beyond the Bubble and the National Archives Docs Teach. Each website utilizes the historic method and primary sources to help students better understand history and build critical thinking skills. And more relevant to our topic today, can be employed in any classroom model. So as my colleagues have discussed, and as we all know, community college faculty face a diverse student population, from high school students beginning their higher education journey to non-traditional students and adult learners expanding theirs. How instructors present their classroom material to this broad student population with their different backgrounds and learning needs is a key challenge for community college faculty. One of the ways that's been identified to help meet this moment is the use of technology. Although articles such as Ron Glassley's "I asked my students to turn in their cell phones and write about living without them" in the MIT Technology Review suggest that faculty should ask students to do without technology in the classroom, community college faculty embrace technology as a positive way of bringing historic documents and the historic method into the classroom. This is not necessarily a flipped classroom model, but an opportunity to help students develop critical thinking skills while engaging with primary documents, doing the work of historians. So the first link in the chat will take you to the Stanford History Education, or SHEG, Beyond the Bubble. Today, we're going to look at 2 of their resources for educators, lessons and assessments. But just so you know, there's a lot more here and you can play around. As this presentation is going to use some screenshots interspersed with website footage, please feel free to play around on the website as it applies to you. I am constantly telling students as they're linking around on their computers in class or on their phones, that look at the things that are of interest to you while keeping one ear, hopefully, on me as we go through the presentation. So we'll start with the lessons section. So you get to choose your topic. They have lessons on intro to the historic method, US history, and world history. And they are adding every single day lessons to all of these. So if you don't find something that's of interest to you right now, bookmark the page and come back to it 6 months from now, 9 months from now, because there might be a topic that just appears that you can start to use. So lessons are broken down by time period. Assessments are broken down by historic skill. More on that later. Each lesson provides you with a description, teacher materials, student materials, often in both English and Spanish for bilingual classrooms, a PowerPoint that you can edit, and then primary documents for that lesson. Now, SHEG works in coordination with the National Archives, their partners. You'll see their logo in something we'll look at in a minute. And so all of these documents are from the National Archives and oftentimes have links to either the National Archives or the Library of Congress. You can use or not use any of the materials at your discretion. So now we're going to do that fun thing where we switch over to a different screen and hopefully it works and you can see what I'm sharing. Excellent. So here's this Chinese Immigration and Exclusion Act that I showed you in the screen share. The lesson and materials are all down here. You can choose from quick links or download. These days, of course, Adobe downloads directly as a tab in your web browser. So you, of course, have to go in and do all of that playing around. When we download the teacher materials, the lesson plan is laid out for you as a PDF so you can print it off and take it directly into your classroom. It starts with notes for each of the PowerPoint slides so that you have material in front of you that contextualizes it both for you, for the students. You can integrate this material into your own lecture notes, what have you. Then each section, and I apologize for if this looks like a quick scroll to you, comes with with my background, I will say are stage notes or instructions to the instructor to hand out student materials. So hand out the timeline. And I'll show you the timeline in a second. Or under number 3, hand out documents A through D. Each of these corresponds to the student material offered. In addition, the lesson plan provides discussion questions for your class, and all of it corresponds to the student materials. So here we see the aforementioned timeline. Then we can see the first set of documents. Thankfully, all of this is annotated. I know that Scott was talking over about the dirty look of history, but oftentimes, particularly in our classrooms, as community college faculty, we know that our students are at different learning levels. At Normandale, for instance, our classes, our history classes, our survey courses have no prereqs. So even students who are taking our developmental courses can still register for our history classes. So it may mean that our students who don't pass the reading exam at college level reading still are taking our classes. And beyond that, we know students have a hard time with history documents, right? Primary sources are not written in a language that is easily identifiable to them because it's not, even if it's written in English, it's not English as they perceive it in the contemporary text. So what I love about these lessons is that they come with a vocabulary box, and those vocabulary words are highlighted. So students just have to come down here. I used to spend a lot of time, and I still do, asking students to highlight words in a document that they don't understand, and then looking them up together. This gives them some of that pre-context. So you get the documents. Each of these comes with, I'm just scrolled down that document, but here it's just easier than scrolling through and worrying your eyes. Student materials often include a worksheet, or to use the language of our K-12 partners, a graphic organizer. Students can complete this while following along with the presentation or on its conclusion. If you're doing this online, these may be questions, you just cut out all of the extra boxes and things. Online, these have text boxes. Again, these can all be moved. To Christina's point about accessibility, you can take these questions directly from the worksheet. You don't have to assign the worksheet. You can put them into your LMS system and let the students answer and view the questions from there. However your LMS is formatted. D2Ls, which is what we use, isn't always great for that. I'm now jealous of my colleagues that get to use Canva after seeing 2 presentations that use it. Now I want it. I can't have it, but I want it. So if you are using this, be aware, of course, that if it downloads to a tab, you have to be careful of how it downloads. And I have a whole document that I had to create to show students that they actually needed to use the print and then save to PDF function once they filled in the boxes. It's easier in a face-to-face classroom, let's be honest. So that's the lesson plan, the materials that you can use there. Hopefully, once again, you're seeing my presentation as we switch over. The second piece, hat, that I'll show you today is, the second piece of the SHEG that I'll show you is their history assessment techniques, or HATs, because everything's got an acronym. Unlike the lessons, these assessments are broken down by only the two history topics, world and US. But they're broken down assessing a historical skill. While we're often trying to assess students' knowledge of history, what history are they consuming? As community college instructors, we also know that students' understanding of historical events can be reviewed at the same time that we are assessing their critical thinking and their understanding of the historic method. And that's why I really love these hats. It asks the student to take that previous knowledge that, as Scott pointed out, we asked them to come to class with. You know, did you do your textbook reading? And then it says, okay, apply that and our knowledge of how to view a source by putting the two together. Each of these hats comes with an overview of the assignment. I know the screenshots are small. Please use the links to take a look at them for yourselves. The different historical skills that are being assessed, and then the materials, which include rubrics. So just as with the history lessons, materials are available in both quick view and as PDFs that are downloadable. The second link I gave you is specifically to this assessment, bread lines in the 1930s. So if you're following along at home, that's the assessment that we'll focus in on right now. When they come with the sources, an assessment, an assignment, and then with the rubric, how SHEG says we can grade this assignment or how we can assess the student's learning. I use these hats both in my face-to-face classes as well as online assignments. As a department, we've actually started using them as part of our departmental assessment. Rubrics also give me a good way of being able to quickly review student learning on the fly. So if you take a look at the image that's on the screen, bread line and Macaulay Water Street Mission under the Brooklyn Bridge, New York, circa 1930, 1934. And the picture's about to get a little smaller. That's why I'm drawing your attention to it. The assessment looks like this. Here are the directions. Simply read the background information, critically look at the source, and then answer these 2 questions. Now, if you were my class, of course, we would do this together, but you're not, and I'm running out of time. And I don't want to talk any faster because I want you to catch what I'm saying. But then I can assess the students' responses to those questions using the rubric that the hat provides. They give them titles like proficient, emergent, and basic. And I can help in real time know if the students are able to use examples from the readings that I had them do before they came to class. Are they applying that knowledge to the answering of this question by giving examples? Or are they just giving a statement? Are they showing? Are they telling but not showing? Or are they just saying, yeah, it works? Okay, here we go. I then can, on the fly in a classroom, switch what I'm doing, go back, talk about, make the links and the connections, help students learn. Okay, moving right along. And this is going to be a hard transition, and I'm sorry, there was no way I could think of to make it easier. I discovered Docs Teach a few years ago when I was hunting up a worksheet to help students better analyze primary documents and primary source types. Like any good government organization, the DocsTeach website is a little more complicated to use than the Stanford one. By clicking on the 3-bar menu in the upper left-hand corner, you're presented with a series of options. For now, I recommend sticking with the activities link because using the search function is a little easier. There are a variety of pre-built activities within the platform, and we'll look at those in a second, but you can build your own or use ones that are pre-created. There are a variety of lesson types to choose from. A couple I've highlighted here are placing documents on a seesaw scale. In this instance, to balance the decision to drop the atomic bomb, students read the document, place it on the scale. Or they place documents in chronological order to understand, in this case, the road to the revolution. In some instances, they take documents and put them on a map. How do we understand the Lewis and Clark expedition via documents that come from a specific place? Each exercise has been built either by an educator or the National Archives education team. And for each lesson, a thinking skill, place on the Bloom's taxonomy, and a grade level have already been applied. And I found ones that are rated for high school and college level often use the upper levels of Bloom's. So we'll take a look at the Lewis and Clark expedition here, in a little bit more detail, or at least a bigger format. Created by the National Archives education team. This is the historical era, its thinking skill, where it fits on Bloom's, and then at this point, what its grade level is. Students then start the activity. They get an overview, a nice big version of the map, and then the documents, which they can take and place here. DocsTeach is recording what they're doing. And in the end, what they will do is click on the when you're done, read whatever they're supposed to be doing here. You can add discussion questions, you can add analysis. They write up their response, put in their name, your email, and then it gets sent directly to you with a screenshot of their completed image. They have the ability to look at these documents, and I encourage you to do that. I'd show you here, but the internet and time. But they can then get a deeper version by clicking on the little orange link here. Many of the written documents are transcribed. Many of the, there's annotations, and there's also a link to the document at the National Archives. So if they want to go see the document in its, as Scott put it, in its dirty form, they're welcome to do that as well. You can say, yes, I want to teach with this. Bookmark this activity into my account, which is free to create. You can copy a version of it that you can edit or print it off as it is. Again, government website, so all of these things take time. If you copy it to a classroom, and you can see the ones I've created here, it then shows up in your list, and you can edit and manage the activity yourself. Here's the same activity. I can change what's in the overview. I can change what the students see. I can add discussion questions, learning outcomes. I can also change the map if I don't really like how it looks, or I want to focus in on all of this is editable. In the last, I know this was a lot of information, and I apologize for that. So much to get in, so much to do. One of the key advantages to using these digital tools is that students start to feel more engaged with their learning. They start to see what documents look like, how we engage with them, and the different ways they can put them together to understand history. And when they are physically moving things around, like with the DocsTeach, or we narrow in on a document and ask specific questions about it, as with the shag hats, students engage with their learning, but they actually become lifelong learners. And that's really what we're trying to do, and teach history. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. really great resources here for technology. I noted Twitter, Tiki Taki Timeline, and of course Docs Teach and other websites. There were a lot of key ideas that came out of this, like teaching with compassion. I liked predatory reading. I liked the idea of trying to get students to be accountable. So I hope that you've enjoyed our presentations and we are open for questions. I'm going to give everybody a minute to write.
While we're waiting, I wanted to tell, I use what Lisa was talking about with Beyond the Bubble, especially the assessment side of things. I actually created I guess you would call it a pathway through my course that was like a 10% assignment all the way through the course that they did. And I used like 7 or 8 of those assessments, having them do especially the ones where I like there's one on the first Thanksgiving where it has them look at the painting from the 1930s that we all think of what the first Thanksgiving looked like, and have them just answer a single question about it. Can historians use this photograph to this painting to tell them what Thanksgiving was like? And of course the correct answer would be no, because a painting in 1930s doesn't really tell us what Thanksgiving is like. But I kind of built these things in to have them start again thinking like a historian, which is the idea behind the SHEG stuff. So I can definitely vouch for the the materials that Lisa was using there. I've used them as well.
Yep. One of the things to use them too is, as you get into it, using and building your own for other classes. We all teach Minnesota history. Every community college has a Minnesota history class. And I have found both platforms to be great avenues for how do I assess in that. I love the Minnesota Historical Society, but so much of its content and so much of its teaching material is directed at our 6th grade teachers who all teach 6th grade Minnesota history. And that's great, except how they teach and at the level I teach are vastly different. So taking some of their resources and applying it in this way, in a proven method, works as well. I like that.
I wanted to take a minute to draw everyone's attention to the chat feature. We've put in some links and things that we think might be useful for you. In addition to contact information, I wanted to draw attention, if anyone is interested in the wave reader that I showed you guys, the place to get it is here. And also, it had come up earlier, but I wanted to make sure that you got a chance to get it as well. In the blog that I wrote for the AHA, I put in a lot of links, things like how to download accessible templates for PowerPoint and Word, different resources, accessibility design guidelines, just some of the things that we talked about in our presentations will be available as links in the side. Brandon, would you mind posting again your bit.ly link so that you can get a transcript of his?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. And I also shared my contact info just now, and the link to Hypothesis, which is that collaborative annotation program that I mentioned at the very end.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Is the Tiki Taki timeline, is that is that open? You don't have to have an account, or?
It's kind of problematic, to be honest. So,
No,
so I didn't get into some of the problematic aspects of some of the digital tools and thinking critically about, how, and you can hear my dog, I'm sure, how certain platforms use information. And so we have to think about what is it we're asking students to do. I use Tiki Taki in a way that sort of breaks it. It's not the way they intended it to be used. So it's free. You have to create an account, but I just created an account for each class. And then we all use the same account to build a timeline together. So again, it's not really what they intended, but it's been working for us.
And then Scott, you said that you also use Docs Teach. Those links are in the chat as well. Dr. Root posted some of those different ones for you guys to access. Oh, I see. We have some questions. All right. So I'm going to open up the first one to everybody. So this is from Mike Russell. How do you address the perennial problem of students not doing their reading or prep before class? And I refer to the hybrid situation, not 100% online. And as a follow-up, what do the experienced hybrid teachers do in lieu of just failing the student for that assignment? What pedagogical approach can be embedded in the lesson to circumvent the student action?
Yeah, I can certainly
start
to address that since I did talk about hybridization. And the one thing for sure, to address that first part, the one thing is I put a grade on almost everything. I mean, everything that the students do has a grade on it. It is usually, in a lot of cases, more of a completion grade than it's something that I'm grading for any, kind of right or wrong answer. And in fact, my feedback usually is, hey, this is something that's not, doesn't have a right or wrong answer. I'm just asking you to think and kind of flex your historical muscle, essentially. But unfortunately, as was said in the question, and as we all know, there are definitely students who aren't going to do that, who are just going to come to class and want to just sit there and not participate and not do the things ahead of time. The good thing at this point in time is I have been doing it long enough at my institution that student services knows to kind of steer students who want that type of class to others and steer ones who are going to be, ideally more wanting an active learning experience into my class. I also do a series of things I call student reflections, where I have the students do a reflection response every single week. And that lets me get into sometimes if there's a reason why they are not doing something. And I have had students say, hey, this didn't happen this week because I had X, Y, and Z happen. And then we can kind of work with that. So a lot of it is just trying to reach out to figure out, why aren't they doing it? Is the course not working for them, or are there actual reasons why they're not doing it? So those are my thoughts on it. Anybody else?
I would like to address this from an accessibility angle, but not just in terms of whether students can see or not, and not just in terms of on-campus classes. But one thing that I found is that when you're dealing with first-time students, they really don't know how to navigate an online class. So it's always helpful to put like an orientation module to get them in there and kind of know what they have to do, just lay it out for them and give them resources. And then another thing you can do is, what I've started doing is give them a practice lesson. It can be a very low point lesson. Typically what I do is I try to get them to read some things on websites and then talk about it, as a way of kind of building that engagement, but also getting them tracked into thinking about what they're going to be doing in that class. A last thing I want to say is that if you do have students who have visual impairments and are using screen readers, sometimes, actually most of the time, they will be unable to read PDF documents. And that is a real problem for us in history, right? You can do a couple of things. If you're generating the document yourself, so you're making it, try as much as possible to use Word or something else and make that accessible to the student. If you can't do that, you can say link it to a website, but also kind of cut and paste the website content into a Word document and then do your check accessibility, so that you're having students view something on a website, but also that there's an accessible version of that website for them. And then the last and most expensive option is buy Adobe Acrobat Pro. This is different from the Reader. The Reader is free. Acrobat Pro can cost as much as $400. There is a less expensive version for faculty and students, which is the Faculty and Student Adobe Acrobat Pro. but it's $118. That allows you to edit Acrobat, and it has an accessibility checker in it, so you can catch a lot of the problems that you might have. But again, it's an investment, and ideally, if you've got a school, if you're at a university or college that has a great endowment, that's something to think about, where they could invest. All right, so if it's okay with everyone, I'd like to move on to our next question. Thanks very much, Mike. That was a great question. Sharmista Rao Chowdhury, your question is, how do you negotiate student privacy issues when using social media tools like Twitter?
I'm guessing that one's for me.
You.
No, it's a really excellent question, and it's something that I've had to think a lot more carefully about over the last couple of years, because I started using Twitter after going to a webinar and people were doing it, and I thought, well, that's kind of cool and it would work for what I want to do with my classes. But I lay out everything for the students, and so actually, if you go back into the slides and you click on that screenshot of a Twitter conversation that's in the middle of the presentation, that'll take you to the instructions that I provide to the students. And in there, I kind of explain that Twitter has pitfalls, and I talk about why we're using it, what the purpose is for us. But then I also let them know that they need to be aware of privacy issues with Twitter. They can opt out if they want to. I give them alternate assignments. They can use pseudonyms. And so that's actually something had I more time, I would have kind of commented on with that screenshot. Is there are some examples of students there who are not using their actual names. I do ask that they tell me what those pseudonyms are so that I know, who they are for the purposes of our class discussion. But then the work we do there is all about kind of conversation, feedback, making connections. There's nothing like where I'll pop in and say, okay, you got an A here, or you need to do this and you got a C, but none of those kinds of things are broadcast. They're on Twitter publicly. It's like Scott was talking about, one of those kinds of assignments where it's they get credit for having done it, and we provide feedback and use it as an opportunity to learn and to kind of flex those historical muscles, thinking about writing concisely. So hopefully that kind of gets at the question.
Would anyone else like to address that question, or should we move on? Okay. All right. Thanks so much. Sherry Huerta, what are your preferences for whole class discussions versus the use of breakout groups and synchronous classes? What are the ways to encourage more participation in either? So whole class discussions versus breakout groups and synchronous classes. What do you guys think? I might address this, which is, I don't teach synchronous classes though, but I have participated in some, and I've also led faculty meetings using synchronous technology, Zoom, all of that. What I have found is that if you put people in breakout groups, you can't monitor them. So it's hard to know what they're doing. And then you have to divide your time. So if you have like 10 breakout groups and you only spend like 5 minutes with each, that's 50 minutes and your class is over, If you do it, I would suggest giving a very guided specific task in case you can't really stay in there long enough to see if they're on task and doing the job. Maybe ask them to, write something up that their group did and submit that. And that might be a way to keep on target. What do you guys think?
Actually, this is one of those moments where the Sheg hats actually are really great, because they're usually pretty small. They're short, you can cut them down. And at least in D2L, which is our LMS, students can either be put into groups within the LMS, or they can register for their own, they can register for a group, and then the group can work on an assignment together. And even if you don't have them turn anything in, or there's just one recorder, it's something that they can all look at. It's all an assignment. Yes, it does ask for prior knowledge, like you need to engage with that, but if students aren't quite prepared for class, they're still able to focus in on the document, and maybe they have some prior knowledge from out in the world that they can access to engage in the conversation. I've also found two things to be helpful. One, when getting students to engage in discussions, particularly when you're not there to sort of walk around the room and be a presence, is community in the classroom. If students feel connected to each other and they feel comfortable, irregardless of the group that they're in, speaking. So building community from day one in your classroom, even if you only meet once a week for an hour on Zoom. And that helps. It also helps to always start by asking students to share their opinion. Even if they're, again, not necessarily prepared with the material you asked them historically to be prepared with, everybody's got an opinion on something. And so even if it's to ask them their opinion on, the weather for the day, their drive in, or even, how they're feeling about class, they will share that with each other and it breaks the ice. So I have found that oftentimes that then perpetuates, students are then more engaged. If you assign them roles too, they'll stick to that. If there's somebody who's supposed to record and somebody who's supposed to keep us on track and read the discussion question, it's not just for high school. K-12 does stuff that we should be looking at because it engages students in the classroom, and frankly, they're familiar with it.
And I was going to say also just that last point that you made, Lisa, that's my, I said that one class that went really well when the only thing I asked was, what did you think? I often, especially if I haven't watched a documentary outside of class, that is my first question. What did you think about X? And, it's not asking them any real specific thing of, hey, give me the historical connections here, give me this. I mean, it opens it up for the students to start talking about something, because I generally find that once they start talking about it, it makes them more able to talk about other things as they go forward, because kind of back to the community thing, they start to feel like their voice can be heard and they can be a part of what's going on there.
Thank you. Okay, our next question is from Scott. How would one engage the students on the incident yesterday while trying to maintain nonpartisan both in the face-to-face, hybrid, and online? Wow, this is a great question. We were talking about this. First thing that I want to say is that the AHA is putting together a website with materials. Is that right, Jeremy, if you can hear me? So that they're going to be providing historians with some things that they can use to talk about it. Is that correct?
That is correct. I'll share it. We've put it together. I'll share a link in the chat.
Okay. Brandon, what were you going to say?
Oh, I mentioned this in my presentation, since I'm currently teaching, and of course I'm teaching an all online asynchronous class. And so again, it was sort of trying to figure out, what do I do to address this to students? But I approached it from that angle of care, more recognizing that, this is a moment of trauma that we're all experiencing in, of course, different ways, but opening up avenues for them to talk about the experience. All of that said, while still, not flinching in terms of making connections to the history that we were studying. I mean, we just finished studying Civil War in New Mexico, and we talked a lot about, so it's an intercession class, so it's all really compressed. So we just talked about all these things that seem like they're very disparate, but we also talked about Blackdom, which is an Exoduster community that was settled in southeastern New Mexico, and kind of confronting the reality that, and I love this because one of the students on Twitter actually said that Blackdom was, I'm trying to remember how they said it, but I don't have the right words, the exact words, but it came across as it was a less racist place, or it was not as brutal, but while still recognizing that there were issues of racism in New Mexico, which is a place that really touts itself on being multicultural in all sorts of ways. So trying to recognize, these deep-seated historical issues that are still, informing things because we haven't really confronted them as a nation, while giving them space so that they can talk about it. And I think this goes back to what other folks have been talking about in terms of providing room for reflection, having built a community where people feel like they can talk to each other. A lot of that groundwork is important for being able, I think, to address these kinds of in the moment issues.
Yeah, and I think putting the things in the historical context is probably one of the best ways to do it without getting into kind of the partisan side of things. To give an example, when Trump was being impeached, I was teaching a second half of American history course and chose to have my case study for the second to last class being the Clinton impeachment. So that we weren't talking necessarily directly about the Trump being impeached and all that, but we were talking about here's the cases. And then of course, then you talk about, well, when has it happened in the past, so making the connections to the past to have it. And of course, I ended that class with talking about, hey, we are going through a historical moment right now where something like this is happening currently as we stand. And I think being able to put things in the historical context is the strength that we have to be able to do it ideally without causing any partisan rancor in our class. Although the closer you get to modern history, the harder it is to not have a partisan rancor rise up in your class. But that's my idea on it.
If I may add something as well, Brandon, I think what you were really saying about compassionate teaching and reaching out to students to ask them, how they're doing today and giving them that space. I think it's important because you never know what experiences your students have gone through. I spoke to somebody about this particular incident. She said that it reminded her of when she was a kid during the Civil War in Guatemala, that, seeing all of that chaos and people storming the Capitol and things like that reminded her of when she was a kid and she saw, tanks rolling through the streets and things like that. And she felt really scared. So it's good, I think, to keep in mind that students may be making those connections on the academic level. I mean, that's what we want to try to do always, but also keeping in mind that there might be some personal link there, and that's also teachable. Okay, our next question is from Amanda Kleintop. Thanks for your presentations. I've used Sheg materials in my classrooms, which sound a lot like Lisa's, and they work great. My question is about using these materials and flipping classrooms more broadly. At my institution, I found that students have a lot of preconceived notions that learning should be the professor giving them information in a lecture. So student feedback in many online and hybrid courses often say they feel like they're teaching themselves. And I guess that's a negative. Have any of you run into this, and do you have any advice for engaging skeptical students in a student-centered or analytical model?
I've leaned into it a little bit with my online, and I let them know learning is lifelong. We're doing this together. We do it through discussions. If you're lucky, there's a loaded word, and you're doing synchronous online courses, there's a way of everybody seeing everyone. They see you, they hear you putting it in context, but in some ways leaning into how we discover and disseminate information on our own is a learning skill. You are learning that every time you engage in class. I may give you materials, direct your attention to them, but you are also consumers of information. You go out and find material on your own every day of your life, even if it's www.google.com. You are learning skills in my classroom that you are unconsciously using every day. And so I leaned into it a little bit. I am as present in my online class as I was, but I know that there are students for whom the face-to-face traditional model, simply the act of having you in front of a class or even wandering around a classroom is what they feel most comfortable with. I think they see a security in their education when we are in the room with them, and we aren't always right there with them. Videos help when we introduce topics and information, when we put our lectures up there. But I absolutely love not the one voice of truth. That is because I could put my lectures up there, but are they really going to watch 4 hours of me? I mean, y'all watched 18 minutes, and if you didn't zone out, I'd be shocked. So are they really going to do 4 hours of this? Probably not. They will do 15 minutes of John Green, though, because He has more technology and access to changing the look than I do. And I am so ready. I practically did. If my screens weren't all the way they are right now, I would have already gone in to my class to change the I am not the one voice of truth. And I want to say that to the students. You are the voice of historical understanding as well. You are becoming historians by engaging in my class. Use the language that we're giving you and be historians too. And so I've leaned into it a little bit while trying to be present.
And I would say this a very similar thing. One of the things that I do, again, I have a very discussion-based class. In fact, you know, in the hybrid class as it stands, it can some classes be almost 100% discussion. Like we are just discussing. Sometimes I have breakup activities, stuff like that. But sometimes it's 100% discussion. And I very much, like Lisa just said, I'm very upfront about it. I tell them this discussion, I have these various things I want to do, but how we get there and what we do in the process of it is up to you. And I may teach this class one time this semester and next semester, or even back to back the same class. And it may actually look quite different because I'm not delivering information to you from this list of this is what you have to get. We are exploring a topic together. And if we get to, like again with the triangle shirtwaist fire, if we get to the relation of the fact that these are all young Jewish women shirt makers who burned up in the fire, we can get to that by about 3 or 4 different ways. And one class may get to it this way, the other class may get to it that way, and both are fine because, we're getting to the place that we need. There's not, that's comes back to this idea of not the voice of truth. I don't go in saying this is how we're going to reach this point. I say we're going to reach this point, but it's up to you to get us there. I'm putting it on the students as much as me. And I wrote in the chat there is a follow-up to the hybrid question that I said before is I ease them into this. I don't just dive in and say, hey, first day, you guys are just going to be the best discussers of all ever, on this. You don't know how to do it. It's an introductory history class. They do have to pass reading at our institution, but that's it. They have to pass the reading requirements before coming in. After that, I'm having to teach them what it means to be a student in especially a discussion-based class, to say that it's okay to have an opinion and it's okay to talk about that opinion and that their opinions are legitimate, because I think a lot of them you hear they don't believe that they know enough, or they don't believe that they are smart enough, or they don't believe that they're somebody who is important enough to be listened to. And is it, this is your opportunity. I'm trying to teach you, again, kind of like what Lisa says, not just how to succeed in my class, but how to be an informed and available student and citizen in the United States.
I wanted to add one quick point before moving on to our next one. Whether you're on campus or whether you're online and you're doing it through a video or through a web page, I think it's important to set students expectations and tell them, this is not a high school class where we feed you information. This is a college class where you learn how knowledge is produced and how history is made. So you give them the original documents, much like what Scott was doing with the FBI file, right? It's messy, it's ugly. I've had some success as well with material culture. Like I'll give them an object or pictures of an object and say, okay, well, what did the pre-modern society do with this? And kind of give them questions to help them figure it out, but also letting them know right from the beginning, this is about you engaging with the material, and that's how history is made. It's a good skill. Mm-hmm. Okay, our last question is from Rinku Pegu. For immediate tasks / keeping tabs on assignments, etc., can WhatsApp group work? Has anyone used WhatsApp for that purpose? That's a tough one. Yeah,
I'm one of the advisors for Phi Theta Kappa, and my officer team uses this group. They change every year. I can't keep up. Just presented in a technology format, and I'm here to tell you, not the most technological person in the world. But I have found that if you, unlike as Brandon was talking about being a monitor of your Twitter feed, if you are not present, but it's connected to your class, there can be some issues and concerns there. So I would say that as you're using those tools, to be aware of that fact. So for instance, if my students are using a group chat function that I'm not on and something happens or something is said, I'm not there to troubleshoot. Unlike my discussion page in my LMS, which I'm monitoring, unlike I'm sure Brendan can talk about the Twitter feed, where you're keeping tabs on it, you're there, you can step in, you can moderate. If you're not present, that moderation isn't possible. So I would just be aware of that when you look into it. That's my cautionary tale.
Yeah, we have been actively encouraged not to use external social media outside of our LMS. So that's something that we have been told, just especially with the current political climate, because we've had some professors get in trouble, even professors get in trouble because a student will say, this professor said X in the classroom, usually taking it out of context, but then they go to social media and said, we already have that problem. Let's not have, we just basically don't want no social media connection to our classrooms is what we're encouraged. So like what Brandon was saying, I'd love, Twitter would be great to use, but we're not going to use it. It's just not going to happen at my college.
Yeah, it's great and it's not so great. But thinking about WhatsApp or some of those other ones, though, I would reiterate what Lisa was saying. Something we've been talking about as a group of faculty working on humanities teaching here in CNM is thinking about ways to teach students to be moderators of their discussions, so that they're not just, it's not just this messy, what we're talking about with Twitter, how it's so problematic, but instead helping them think about, well, what can we do to make this a place where there could be civil discourse? And again, that's not easy, and it's not necessarily going to be something you do in a history class either, but it would be something you might have to take into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Passions flare up about the Whigs versus the Republicans. You never know. and there we go. There's your history nerd for the day.
I wanted to comment on that as well. I think that when you take something outside of the learning management system or LMS that your college uses, you do risk losing a lot of the support and benefits of that. One of the things is that increasingly all of this accessibility technology is built into the system. So for example, Canvas now has the option of using Ally, as does Blackboard and Moodle and DTL and Brightside and all of those. So when you take it out of that, you may risk losing accessibility. And then there's also the question of, how easy is it for students to get online to do these things? That said, though, if you can, the format of WhatsApp is very similar to Canvas discussion boards, and that it's kind of a rolling thread, right? And Canvas developed it that way because they found that people liked that sort of YouTube style comment thing where it's just like a rolling list of people commenting, on each other. So it is intuitive and it works similar to what a lot of LMSs are using. I would say maybe start with using it as a supplement to the class and see if, like students could take their chat out there. You could post pictures or something and have students discuss it. Maybe it could be extra credit, and then see what your administration feels about using outside stuff like that for course specific content, and go with that.
Thanks to everyone for a wonderful discussion. We've gone over time, and I don't think anyone's noticed. This has been great. This has certainly been eye-opening for me, and for I'm sure certainly for our listeners as well. Well, this concludes our presentation. A recording of this webinar will be available on the AHA's YouTube channel soon, and we'll share that on social media when it is. You can view recordings of other past virtual AHA events on our YouTube channel as well. Don't miss our other upcoming events, including a plenary session on racing history at 7 p.m. Eastern today, and a late-breaking plenary on the international implications of the U.S. election on Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, a topic that I'm sure the panelists are rapidly revising their comments for as we speak. Thanks again to our generous sponsors, the National Endowment for the Humanities, Stanton Foundation, the History Channel, and Oxford University Press. Thanks to all those who submitted questions. And finally, a special thanks to our panelists today. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Be
Thank
safe,
you.
be well, stay healthy.